Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be covering how to drift on CarX drift racing on a steering wheel. Alright guys, so in today's video we're going to be trying to basically cover all the basics and go as much in depth as we can without making this a extremely lengthy video on how to drift. So we're going to be starting off by taking a look at how you can implement what you've learned on controller and bring it over to the wheel. We're going to be taking a look at assists, wheel settings, and how to properly tune a car for the wheel, or how I like to tune my cars for the wheel. We're also going to be taking a look at how to initiate a drift and all the different ways there are to initiate drift. We're going to be taking a look at how to maintain that drift and hold that drift. And then we are going to be learning how to transition from one drift into another drift. That way we can start trying to hopefully connect full tracks. With that being said, I'd just like to put this disclaimer out here. I have about 160-ish hours on CarX with the wheel. I've never played CarX on controller, but I've played a lot of other games and drifted on a lot of other games on controller before I got my wheel. So I feel like I have a decent amount of experience there to try and help you guys out. But like I said, I've only been playing for about 160 hours on the wheel. So I'm by no means a pro, and by no means are my tunes or my tips a true 100% way to learn how to do this, and even might be wrong in some people's eyes. So just keep that in mind. I'm by no means a pro. I'm just a uh, wheel user that is trying to help other wheel users get better. And hopefully we can do that with this video. So let's jump right in. The first thing we're going to be getting into is the major difference between drifting uh, on controller and the wheel. So there's going to be two major differences. Obviously, you're using a steering wheel to steer yourself opposed to a joystick, and you're using pedals instead of a trigger. When drifting on a controller, for the most part, most people use the trigger or the throttle as an on-off switch, where you can go from full throttle to nothing in the matter of milliseconds. And same thing with the joystick. You can steer from all the way full left lock to full right lock in the matter of milliseconds. Whereas on the wheel, that is not possible. It takes a lot more time to go all the way from one side to all the way to the other side. And also, same thing with the pedals. It takes a lot longer to go full throttle to nothing. When drifting on the wheel, you are going to be focusing a lot less on your steering inputs and a lot more on your throttle control. You can use a lot of the stuff that you learned on controller and carry it over to the wheel. If you were drifting properly on the controller, you were focusing on throttling, and you weren't just going from full throttle to nothing. There's nothing wrong with drifting like that. It's just if you've been practicing your throttle control on the controller, it'll help a lot on the wheel. It's just you're going to be using your foot instead of your finger. But the major difference is going to be the steering wheel and when to catch and release the steering wheel. And we're going to get into that eventually once we start learning how to initiate and how to hold the drift. The next thing we're going to be covering is what kind of wheel settings you're going to be using, uh, whether it's in-game or through software through your wheel. And we're also going to be taking a look at assists and all the different settings that there are for the wheel inside the game. I'm just going to tell you guys what my Logitech settings are. I run 10% center spring with the center spring checked off. So that's pretty much it for Logitech settings. I leave my linearity at 50%, which makes it a true 900 rotation wheel. So we'll go ahead and take a look at our in-game settings here, just to show you guys what I'm running for force feedback and assists and whatnot. Gearbox type, I run manual, obviously. I have a H pattern shifter with a clutch. Clutch is manual. Ignition type is simplified, just because I got tired of having to start my car or click the button every time I want to start my car. Control scheme, steering wheel, obviously. We're playing with the steering wheel. Steering angle is at 900. A lot of people will turn this down when learning. This is something you can do, but you don't want to stay at 540 or 720 for too long because a turn like this will correlate to a lot more of a turn on the wheels on the actual car. So I suggest just going straight to 900, learning like that, and you won't learn any bad habits where you're going to be trying to steer the car more with the steering wheel and less with the pedals. At 900, trying to steer the car with just the steering wheel will be pretty much impossible. So you won't have the chance to learning bad habits where you're trying to focus way too much on the wheel and you're forgetting about your throttle brake input and you're just going on off switch with the gas, which is not what you want to do. So I strongly suggest learning at 900. It's going to be a little bit more difficult, but once you get it, you're not going to have any bad habits that you're going to have to try and break. With my setup, I run wheel force feedback 100 or 1, auto centering force at standstill I run at 0.8, steering assist off. If you're trying to learn on the wheel, I suggest not using steering assist because you're not playing with the wheel at that point. When you're drifting in real life, you initiate a drift, you have to counter steer. When you're playing a game, if you're trying to, somewhat simulate real life, I know CarX is an arcade drifter. We'll touch on that again after. With all that being said, I suggest learning with steering assist off. If not, you're basically just playing with the controller at that point. So I don't really see the point in using the wheel. I don't have anything against people that use assist. Don't get me wrong. I don't think one is more wrong and right. Just for the purpose of this video, we're trying to learn how to use the wheel, how it would be in a car. And so we're going to have steering assist off. Our presets are set to custom. We have prediction at 0.5. Stabilization is all the way down. Smoothing is at 1. Acceleration is at 1. Inertia is at 0. We have post-processing feedback on because we are on a G920 and it is suggested to run on and 0.25 and 0.15 on a G920. So that is why I run that. I've always ran it. I've never tried it without it. So I can't tell you really what it does, but I like the way it feels with this on, so I leave it on. And I'm personally not sure if this is considered an assist. If it is, then I guess I do play with assist. If not, well, I guess I don't play with assist. All these other settings here are pretty much personal preference. They won't really affect the way the wheel feels. This is just for your braking, your fuel, your handbrake, your clutch, and all those linearities. So that you can all play with yourself. And also all these settings here are personal preference. This is what works for me. It doesn't necessarily mean it'll work for you. I'm on PC, so I also use the Logitech software like I was saying. I have the center spring off in the Logitech software and I have it at 10%. So these settings might not work for Xbox players or PS players, so just a fair warning there. Just a quick note before we move on to tuning a car and finding a good drift car. I just want to say that I strongly suggest learning what all these different settings do on the screen. Learning what all these settings do will help you fine tune your steering wheel settings a lot. Just going off of other people's videos, like copy pasting my video, might get you into good settings, but eventually if something resets or if some car just doesn't feel right with your settings, you won't know what to tweak to make it feel better. So I do suggest doing a little bit more in-depth research and figuring out what all these things do. All right, guys. So a big part of drifting is going to be your car setup. So like I said earlier, I'm by no means a pro. So this is what I like to run. It doesn't necessarily make it wrong. It doesn't make it right. It's just what I like to run. So this is the same thing as your wheel tuning. I suggest going to look at videos that go really in depth into tuning. That'll teach you what every single slider does, what every single um, piece of your front end, your dampers, your suspension, what that all does to the car and how the car feels. Once you have a better understanding of that, it'll be a lot easier for you to tune your own cars and fix your tunes on the fly if something feels wrong. So we're going to take a quick look at what I run here. And once we take a quick look at our tuning, we will be able to get into some drifting. This is what I run for suspension. This isn't what I run for every single car, right? Every car is going to be different. Some cars are heavier, some cars have a shorter wheelbase, some cars are more narrow. So it all depends on the car. But this is what I'm running on this car right here. This is a 90s tune. If you guys want, I could do another video with hundreds. I don't mind. I mainly run 90s. I like to just run low and slow tandems on this game. If I want to do like fast-paced drifting, I'll jump on a set of Corsa. Uh, but with that being said, I still can do, hundreds and 110s. I just prefer 90s. So that's what we're going to do for this video. So we have our front end slightly higher than the back end. We have our rear end slightly softer for the most part as our front end. That way we have a little bit more grip in the back and we're not too loosey-goosey. Sway bar stiffness, I always go 50 and then 10, and then depending on how the car feels, I adjust based off of that. So these are the settings I run for alignment. Like I said, I suggest learning how to tune, learning what all these different settings do, and you'll be able to make your own tunes fairly easily. Generally, you do not want to run this much camber in the back. I made this car as a low, slow stance car. But generally, you're going to want to run a little bit of positive camber in the back, like 0.20, 0.50 for extra grip. But because this is a low and slow car and it's just a stance out car, I have the cambers matching the front and the back, just for aesthetics basically. Wheels, this is going to be, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. You have your rim size, you have your tire width size. The narrower your tire are, the less grip you're going to have, the slower you're going to be drifting. Tire pressure, higher pressure in the front means a little bit more grip in the front. Lower pressure in the back is going to give you more grip in the back because even though it's at such a low PSI or KPA, when the tire starts warming up, it's going to expand and it's going to inflate more. So that's why we're going to be going with a lower PSI in the back, because once those tires get hot, they're going to get a little bit more pressurized. We're running 90 adhesions. Like I said, this is a 90s build. Wheelbase width, you just fit it to however you want the car to feel. Generally, you're going to want the back to be a little bit wider than the front because we're going to be steering with our gas and brake, not our steering wheel. And then tire profile, once again, that's personal preference. This is a low and slow car, so I went 30. You can go, it doesn't matter what you go with this. It's all depends on what you're trying to build. For brakes, I run generally, depending on how heavy the car is, 3,000 to 4,000 Newton meters of force on the brakes. This car is a two-door. It's a little bit lighter than other cars that I normally run, so I'm running closer to 3,000. Something that would be a four-door and a little bit heavier, I'd run closer to like 3,500. Front brake bias for me is all the way at the front. The reason for this is so we can do left foot braking. You don't need to go 100% to the front. You can go like 90, 85%, but I wouldn't go any lower than 85%. That way you can still stay on the gas while you're doing your left foot braking, so you can maintain your drift and slow yourself down simultaneously. ABS is on. I just don't want the front tires to be locking up. I want to stay nice and smooth, so I keep ABS on. Launch control, tandems. No, I don't do top 32 competitions because I run Kino and I don't feel like shutting it off and on all the time. Engine tuning. I have my engine way over tuned in this car. I can admit that 100%. 102 horsepower for a low and slow car is way more than enough. But I just like the power, so I brought it all the way up. When you're learning, you're probably going to want to stick somewhere from like 4 to 500. So just keep that in mind. The higher horsepower, the easier it'll be to spin out. You don't need your tires to be spinning all that fast. 102 horsepower is quite excessive. I'm just an overachiever, I guess. I don't know. So engine tune-up, right? That's really up to you. You can crank it all the way up. Like I said, I suggest 4 to 500 horsepower for starting off. Max torque, I always put this lower, so you'll get less power out of your motor. But the power at the higher RPMs will be more consistent and more linear, which helps for consistency. Rev limiter, I bring that all the way up. I want to hear those RPM scream. Turbocharger, of course, I want to hear that turbo. And turbocharger air pressure, self-explanatory. It's controlling how much boost you have. So the lower the number, the less boost. So for the purposes of this video, we can drop the horsepower down. We'll say 645. Transmissions, my tranny type in this is standard because I use an H pattern shifter. Differential type is set on spool because a spool in this game is considered as a welded diff, so it's 100% locked no matter what you're doing. For the gearing, I do something similar to a video I've seen where I just do every single car I build this is the gearing I do. So I do 3, 2, 150, 125, 111, 6th gear I don't even touch because I never use 6th gear. And then I just try that out, see how it feels, and then adjust the final drive based off of how long the gears feel. So that's our quick look at tuning. Like I said, once again, I'm going to touch on this. I strongly suggest you go out, look at some YouTube videos, look at some forums, learn what all the different stuff does when it comes to tuning. It'll help you in this game, it'll help you in any other car game you play. Learning how to tune cars is very important for drifting. Like I was just mentioning in the tuning segment, depending on what car you pick, you will be at a slight advantage or disadvantage for wheel drifting. Personally, I found that most of these cars that are in my favorite list are good cars to use for learning on the wheel. The general rule of thumb for me, anyways, when it comes to wheel drifting, is the longer the wheelbase, the easier it'll be to learn on. So I would strongly suggest using like the JDM burner, the Horizon GT4. Another good one is the Flash. So any car with a little bit longer of a wheelbase will just make learning transitions a little bit easier and a little less snappier. You'll be less likely to do 360s out of your transitions. The Cobra, the Mustang RTR, is another really good car to first start using when learning how to drift. Depending on what car you use, like let's say you were to use the Redline S, which has a really short and narrow wheelbase, it's going to be a lot flickier of a car, and it's going to be a little bit harder to control your transitions when you're first learning. But eventually, once you get a hold of it, you'll be able to use the car no problem. But just for at first learning purposes, I would suggest using some of the cars I just suggested just now. Another thing too that I forgot to elaborate on in the tuning bit, 90 adhesive is going to be a little bit easier to learn, in my opinion, when first starting off, because everything is going to be a little bit slower. You're going to be drifting a little bit slower. Your transitions are going to be a lot slower, and it should be a little bit easier to control those transitions and not end up doing 360s. Hey guys, this is Future Popo. So as I'm making this video, I'm realizing that it is going to be way too long if I make it in one video. So we're going to be making this a two-parter. The first part, which we just covered, is going to be all the stuff that you're going to need to do before we get into drifting, and part 2 is going to be learning all the actual physical aspects of drifting. So if you guys were looking more forward to the actual drifting portion of the video, less of the tuning and wheel setting portion of the video, make sure to check out part 2. If this video helped you guys at all, please leave a like, consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this, and I'll see you guys on part 2. Happy drifting.